We take it for granted that these days we have the power in our pocket to record high definition, high quality video on the go through the use of any of our smartphones, old and new. For example, this original Google Pixel actually was able to record 4K video and would still be able to if the whole thing wasn't almost bent clean in half and with a broken screen to boot. And even on this absolutely ancient iPhone 4S, actually can record 1080p video at 30 frames a second, all through that minuscule pinhole of a lens. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. Even my present day smartphone, which is nothing new or fancy, it's an iPhone 7, can record 4K video at 30 frames per second. And mind you, these are all old phones, starting with the iPhone 4S, the Google Pixel, and this iPhone 7 is the newest phone from around 2017. But things weren't always that way, and the convenience of recording HD video was often lost on people that, didn't have smartphones, like flip phones. Flip phones probably coined the term cell phone quality video. Anybody who ever worked with the video files that these cameras on these flip phones or similar generated knew that the quality was absolutely dreadful. Video files with a 3GP file extension at like a 160 by whatever resolution, and the frames per second was nothing to shake a stick at. Probably 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 if you were lucky frames per second. But you probably didn't know that there's a flip phone out there, one of probably a few others, that high definition video. Now, I'm definitely not one of those people that does smartphone or cell phone reviews, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But this is the Kyocera Dura XE E4710. This phone is from 2018 and is one of those rugged business tradesman oriented phones targeted at people that have professions that require a phone that can withstand a lot of use and abuse, but don't necessarily need all the frills that come with a smartphone. Excusing the screwdriver covering up the serial number, because at one point in time I did use this phone with my cellular service and would still like to retain that ability if the need should ever arise in the future if something were ever to happen to my iPhone. And it's thankfully through the use of that slot that you could expand the memory of this phone very easily by using any kind of microSD card that you want. And of course, these aren't the most robust little card trays in the world. They're rather flimsy. This is actually probably the weakest point of this entire phone, are these flimsy little metal card slots for the SIM card and the microSD card. Off camera, I almost broke this little metal door flap thing, and I had to very carefully reinstall it. And the microSD card slides into these little metal tabs. You close this, and if it actually cooperates, you slide it to the top of the phone, and you've now upgraded the memory. This uses a Kyocera branded rechargeable battery, and that is actually the #1 complaint on Google about these phones that comes up. I kid you not, if you Google the model number of this phone and scroll down on Google, that's the first review that comes up, talking about how the battery doesn't even last a full day. This has a rubberized, texturized finish very similar to what Lenovo, or I should say a lot of the IBM ThinkPads used to have, and that finish carries over throughout the rest of the phone more or less. And then you also have this little screw here which will actually retain the battery door, and you could use a screwdriver or a coin to tighten this to the phone. 2 volume buttons over here on this side, just like what you get in an iPhone, and a button which is programmable to function as a shortcut key for a couple of different functions. On the top are 2 buttons, one for turning on speakerphone and the other one for exiting out of a call, so you don't even have to look at the phone. If you have it on speaker, you could just use these buttons and your muscle memory to put it on speaker or to hang up a call. On the front there's an LED flash, very small pinhole camera. On this side is a 3.5mm headphone jack, and I'm sure this would work with older Apple EarPods, the wired kind, because it has a little headset icon on it, but it's just a regular 3.5mm jack, so you could just hook up a regular old pair of wired headphones to this thing and use it as an MP3 player. And while I wait for this thing to turn on, I guess it's probably a good time to mention that this is a 4G capable phone, something that a lot of people were in the dark about when a lot of carriers such as AT&T this past winter, and by past I mean last year, decided to phase out 3G service in an effort to focus their efforts on 5G migration and expansion. This is actually running some variant of a heavily modified version of Android. You do get a web browser, you do get contacts, which still have a bunch of my personal phone numbers programmed in, so we'll avoid looking at that for the time being. But this does have a calendar. Something that this phone had going for it is a simulated iPhone or Android style approach to messaging, whereas a lot of older flip phones would show each text message in their own thread, sort of like emails if you have conversation mode turned off. This phone would actually group them as little chat bubbles. This also had the, I believe the T9 is what they called it, predictive text, interpretive text mode, which you changed and accessed by pressing this OK button, changing it to XT9 word, and by typing in the key that corresponded with each letter of the word, it would actually usually be able to predict what you were trying to type with a minimal effort on your part of typing in the keys. And you see sometimes it gets it wrong, as it did for the last two words. That's where you just change the word, you just keep using the left and right controls, and you got to scroll down, and apparently either I misspelled it or it can't figure out that I'm trying to write the word phone in here, but you get the point. This phone also had a very primitive, but for a while usable interface that you could use to access and set up with your email provider, Yahoo, AOL, Outlook, Microsoft Exchange, AT&T, or some other provider where you could actually manually put in the credentials. And of course, get the customary calculators here to help you cheat at math, tipping, and converting units of measurement. This phone also was able to connect to Wi-Fi. Definitely not the easiest thing putting in your password, but it will connect and allow you to use the browser to browse the web, albeit in a very limited fashion, using Wi-Fi and not data. Likewise, this also has Bluetooth, and this also has a tethering mode. So eat your heart out, iPhones, where you have to pay extra to get mobile hotspot functionality. This phone was doing it and can do it without you having to activate that feature on your service, because this is considered a dumb phone. You just go in here and you normally turn that mobile hotspot on, take note of your Wi-Fi connection name and your password, and you could connect to your cellular service through this phone's built-in Wi-Fi hotspot. And just like that, you can use this phone as an MP3 player and play this through Bluetooth or using the headphone jack. And there's actually some settings in here like shuffle, equalizer modes, normal, classical, dance, hip-hop that actually work. You can even bring up the details here and it'll give you a nice rundown of the album, the artist, song, the genre. A lot of features in here I wouldn't expect to see on a flip phone. Let's try that again because I wasn't recording and the tape's running out.
Say a command.
Send text.
Say the name or number.
And something this phone did very similar to what modern day smartphones do is group different things, different events, aka notifications, in the aptly titled section of your phone called notifications, which in this case of this phone is accessed by pressing this left key. And that will show you different things that are currently going on, and then you could dismiss the notification, click OK to go into it to read it in full detail, or you could also click details, and that in this case will give us info of what's playing currently in the background. For whatever reason, this phone was working the last time I had it out and was using it to take pictures for testing purposes several months ago. But I don't know what happened now, because I've tried smacking this thing around a few times, turning it off and on, and nothing seems to be remedying this oddball error that pops up. It never brings up the actual camera, and it eventually will just show you this error saying that it's exiting the camera application due to an error. So what are we supposed to do now? Well, thankfully, like most things I have, they come in pairs. I have a second one, and this one's actually still connected to AT&T. And you can see right here very clearly we are connected to 4G LTE. Now hopefully the camera still works on this phone, but if I click camera, there we go. I see a picture. and it's also trying to shut off the on-screen display for some reason. You also do get a red LED, a tally light, just like on a regular camcorder, that tells you when the camera is in use. So there's a couple of different things in here that is rather surprising yet again for a flip phone camera, and these images are definitely being interpolated up to that resolution because they, while they're not the clearest, cleanest images they should be, if they're supposedly being taken at 5 megapixels. There's different scene modes: landscape, food, night, sports, memo for taking pictures of text on a white background, like scanning in documents. Multiple shots, there's a burst setting in here, flash setting off on this shot only, on always or auto. Self timer, different effects. There's well, that's not going to work too well unless we get something with color in the background. Get sepia, black and white, negative. This looks like old Sony Handycam picture effects. Brightness, white balance, focus settings. This can actually focus continuously. This is where things get interesting. Once we switch over to video, you see these black bars. You need to flip the phone horizontally to be able to record high definition video in the correct aspect ratio. And the resolution is listed up here at 720p. This phone icon's telling us that it's going to store it to the phone's internal memory and not a micro SD card, and the scene selection is automatic. We go to resolution under video. You see you get the usual ones like what most flip phones were able to record, like 176 by 144, 320 by 240, 640 by 40, but 1280 by 720. You could do a silent movie, turn off the built-in microphone. You could turn the video light on or off while you're recording, which is very dim, but will help a little bit. Not by much. Certainly not like an iPhone or Android phone's built-in light will. Unfortunately, the camera lens cover on this phone is extremely worn, and you can see that it has like a frosted appearance from a bunch of micro scratches, and I'm sure if I use some kind of a plastic polish I could repair that, but there's no point because I'm never going to use this thing to record video. However, this phone's lens, which has a non-functional camera, go figure, its little lens cover here is smudged up from fingerprints, but is otherwise in perfect condition. The frame rate is probably something approaching 15 FPS, so nothing too special. But the fact that this can record high-definition video with relatively decent audio from the built-in microphone is just absolutely amazing to me. And in fact, I actually have a number of video files that I recorded on this phone when I was using this for a while. And I took quite a few different pictures and videos with this phone. And thankfully, they're still stored on that micro SD card that's in here. So now, through the wonders of video editing, we could switch over from what looks like great HD video to somewhat mediocre, but still amazing for the time and form factor. I mean, a flip phone with 720p HD video, that to me is unheard of. And now we could switch to this thing and see how it stacks up.
Yeah, we should put it on our Facebook page.
Yes,
I
you
was
should.
totally under the impression it was just random residents.
Letting you know it's the comps they retrieve.
So while the quality isn't quite up to today's standards, and it looks pretty much typical for low quality so-called HD camcorders, or what you can get these days that are calling themselves 4K camcorders. The image looks over sharpened. It has a variable frame rate of around 15 frames a second, which causes a lot of problems during editing and playback. The audio is poor quality, mono, so even though it's not the best in terms of quality, to be able to accomplish that using a flip phone, still takes me by surprise.